Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 253. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Claire Barner about her debut novel, Moonrising. This sci-fi romance takes place approximately 50 years in the future and is set largely on the moon's first colony. Main character Dr. Alex Cole has spent her life looking for ways to solve the Earth's growing food problem. When her funding is threatened, she finds herself being thrown a lifeline by a charismatic businessman who hires her to create a sustainable food source for the moon's first hotel. While living on the moon and trying to grow food is challenging enough, back home on Earth, support for her plans to save the planet are being threatened by government resistance and eco-terrorists. Is she willing to die for her grandiose vision of saving humanity? And is she willing to sacrifice those she loves in the process? Claire describes this story as cozy and romantic with some very real science and a heart-pounding climax. In this episode, I'll chat with Claire about her writing journey, her favorite lesser-known sci-fi author who she describes as the kind of writer she wants to be, and why she begins each book with a very specific theme, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Claire Barner, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your debut sci-fi novel, Moonrising. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, absolutely. This book is a science fiction romance. It is near future. It takes place about 50 years in the future on the first moon colony. And it is cozy, romantic, has a lot of science in it, but also has kind of a heart-pounding climax as well. And it follows Alex, who is a scientist at the University of Chicago, who is a food scientist and agronomist. And she is hired to develop the first greenhouse on the moon that will develop a sustainable food source for the moon. And while she's there, she falls in love with Mansour, who is an Emirati businessman who has been working to develop a moon hotel and also has much greater ambitions to move the population of Earth into space to preserve Earth as a place that will have biodiversity and kind of move heavy industry into space. So he has these very grandiose ambitions, and the two of them are very different. And so it's very opposites attract romance, and also has a lot of kind of the details of what it would be like to truly live in space. It's very grounded in science. So that's the basic plot.
Good. Well, what I want to do is discuss setting first. I was trying to figure out how should we tackle this book, but I think really because this one is unique. Let's talk about setting first, and in particular, time and place. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, near future, so not too far out, and far away, but really not too far away. So, let's talk about two things. One, how freeing was that to not have to be confined to the here and now? And yet how limiting was that? Because you're talking about only so far in the future and the moon, which we know a fair bit about what it would be like to be there. So it's not like you could just make everything up. So let's talk about the freedoms and the constraints of selecting the setting that you selected.
Yeah, yeah. So I really grounded a lot of this in research. I read memoirs of astronauts who had been to the moon, memoirs of astronauts who lived on the ISS. And so a lot of the detail around kind of what it would be like to live there is based on astronaut experiences and kind of plans that NASA and private space entrepreneurs have for living in space. But at the same time, I did take some liberties. I wanted it to feel like kind of a comfortable environment. Like I gave everybody a bathroom in their room, which is probably not completely realistic, but I don't know, it's a romance. So I want people to be able to shower. um, but definitely it's like a very constrained environment. It's almost a locked room kind of situation, right? Like they're not going anywhere and there aren't that many rooms to take for things to take place. But I actually started the book. There's kind of two big settings at the beginning of the book. So the first is Hyde Park in Chicago on the University of Chicago campus. And it is January and it is in the middle of a polar vortex. And we get kind of a glimpse of climate refugees living in tents. And we get a glimpse of kind of people living their everyday lives, like going to bars. And even though there's a polar vortex, because, this is just normal, right? 50 years from now, this is what it's going to be like. The weather is going to be crap and we're going to just keep going. So I had that setting. And then Mansour, he lives in both Boston and Abu Dhabi. And so he starts in Boston and then he goes to Abu Dhabi. And he's thinking a lot kind of in his kind of thoughts about kind of the differences between the two places and kind of the setting of Abu Dhabi and how it's both home for him and a place of constraint. And so that's a really vivid setting. We see him dining in the Bedouin fashion on low cushions in the open air in Abu Dhabi with his father and his family and kind of the dishes that they eat. And so we have these like really rich, real places, very vivid in terms of both the way the climate feels, the way it impacts the characters, the foods they're eating. And then they go to the moon, which is a very harsh setting, right? Like, and one of the big plots is around food. And so there's no food there, right? They're eating these ready meals that are disgusting and they're just like forcing them down. The water is metallic tasting, and there's just stuff everywhere. Everyone's cramming in their experiments in these tiny rooms. And so I think kind of having these more like lush settings at the beginning really serves to kind of contrast with the way it feels on the moon. And then kind of what Mansour is focused on is building a hotel, right? So he's kind of focused on this like luxury experience, and there's a real tension there because the scientists are like, what are you doing? Who cares about any of this? Who cares about these rich tourists? We are doing like important experiments here and you're just like a distraction. And so I think the setting of the hotel is another really interesting one. And then finally, I have a third point of view character, Victor, who remains on Earth for most of the book. And so I think having kind of a person on Earth still helps to kind of give a little more flexibility, right? Like he can go to a dance club in Manhattan and that kind of things, like in a party in DC, a political party, those kinds of things, so that like it's not all just on the moon where the setting can be a little constraining. So I think adding Victor kind of opened up the variety of the setting.
Right, right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about everyday life on the moon. As you mentioned, there's this tension between creating something that it sounds luxurious and romantic and exciting, and maybe the harsher reality that people are trying to figure out how to live on the moon and make life better for everyone back home. So in the book, you talk about sort of everyday things that people might be doing or interested in or wrestling with so like growing tomatoes, for example, or, just growing things and not just getting them to grow, but trying to get them to thrive. So how did you select these sort of samples of like sort of the micro example of of the reality of what life would be like trying to grow
Yeah.
tomatoes, you know?
Yeah, so I'm a big gardener in my personal life. I just harvested a huge bowl of tomatoes from my yard earlier today. And so I think when I decided, when I was creating my main character, Alex, and decided to kind of make her an agronomist, that allowed me to really pull in a lot of the sensory details of what it's like to grow things like tomatoes. And so I brought a lot of that kind of knowledge and experience into this setting. And then, as soon as I decided that, I really leaned into kind of like, what would she be thinking about? What would she be dealing with? So she's like dealing with like a fungus in the greenhouse that's like destroying everything, or she's struggling because, she can only grow things in hydroponics and she wants to develop compost so she can grow, create her own soil to develop vegetables that grow better in soil. And so these kind of, I mean, this is why, it feels cozy, right? Is because a lot of these are very kind of everyday problems that she's really focused on. And I think it ends up being really compelling and different from most sci-fi, which, yeah, there are stakes involving kind of saving the planet, but really the stakes are there's fungus growing on my vegetables. So I think I had a lot of those kinds of details. There's a lot of details of Mansour. He kind of bullied his way onto the actual moon. He was the financer for the project, and he gets there and he's like, "Wait, whoops! Like, I shouldn't be up here. There should be a team of engineers up here." And so he actually has to like work with the robots, put on a spacesuit, clean out the dust that's getting in the robots, like kind of stuff that he wouldn't normally have done in his life. And so there's a lot of like minutia around that as well. But I always tried to keep it going, right? Like it's all very much tied to the characters and kind of what they care about. But it is fun. There's like one detail that I really love is like there's a kind of a reoccurring theme about the moonshine that they distill on the moon. And they call it the moon's legendary moonshine, and it's just like a little Tupperware like sitting in the fridge, because that's the only thing they have, right, to drink. And just like those kinds of little details are I think fun for me to kind of think about what would it really be like, and what kind of would people care about when they were kind of living in this world where it's really pared down to just the essentials, and also who are they? What kind of person would be like, yes, I want to go live on the moon? And it'd be a very driven scientist, very focused on their work, not caring a lot about comfort. And so I think a lot of those themes, which I really got a lot from astronaut memoirs, and kind of the like living conditions on a place like the ISS are actually really rough. And they don't complain about it because it's like the pinnacle of their career. They want to be there, but it kind of made for having like a lot of good sensory details on what it would be like to actually live in space.
How did you find the balance between the bigger story, right? This sort of bigger sci-fi adventure idea and this smaller story that, where it's drilled down to a few smaller characters and their cares and their everyday experiences where attraction develops and that sort of thing. How do you
Yeah.
find the balance? Do you find one easier to write than the other? Is it a gut check at the end of a chapter? Too much of one, not enough of the other? Like how do you balance those two
Yeah,
things?
that's a good question. I don't know if I have it right, but I feel like I had a very political backdrop to this story. So one of the plots, Victor and Mansour's brother Rashid are on Earth, and they're trying to pass a law called the Homestead Act that would fund moving families to the moon. It really is, they're considering it like kind of jump starting kind of this kind of movement into space in a much more systemic way. And so there's a big kind of political undercurrent there where they're working to kind of lobby and pass a law behind the scenes. So there is some kind of like more macro ideas in there. But really, I think the strongest stories start with character, right? And so this book is about these four characters and their journeys. And so Alex, her journey is really about figuring out how to reach other people, figuring out how to trust other people. She's been isolated, she's been rejected in the scientific community, and she doesn't really know how to. She just thinks, I've got the data on my side. Why aren't you just going with it? And that's not working for her, right? And so part of this is about kind of her finding community on the moon colony. And I think that is where the magic happens, right? Is like in the characters. And so when I'm reading science fiction, the most compelling stuff I think is all around the characters and the relationships, not the big space battles. So this is not a book with space battles because the physics around space battles is iffy. This is much more a book about people, and so I think it also is very accessible to someone who doesn't normally read science fiction because it is much more grounded in people and characters.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the characters. As you mentioned, there's sort of four main ones. I'm curious, were there any that you identified with more? Were there any that you found, okay, it's easier for me to understand this character's point of view, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, etc.? Was it difficult to step into the shoes or the head of any of them? How did
Yeah.
you, and are these characters that you would hang out with? Would you like them as people? I mean, they've been talking to you now for a long, long time, but do you think you would like them if they were real?
Yeah. I love that last one. I would hope so. I always try to write characters that I would like to be around because I'm a big rereader, and so I enjoy kind of revisiting characters. And so I feel like as a reader, my favorite characters are the ones that I enjoy. Doesn't mean they're not messy, but like they would be people I'd want to be with. So my main character, Alex, she really is based on kind of the worst version of me. So she's based on kind of the instincts I try to push down. So she's very abrasive. She's very aggressive. She kind of is my way or the highway. Just why won't they just listen to me? I'm right and I have the data to back it up, and I don't understand why people just won't be rational about things. And so that's me on my worst day. She also, I mentioned, I'm a gardener. She's an agronomist. She's a scientist at the University of Chicago, which is my alma mater. So she kind of, lives in Chicago along with me. So she's kind of the one that's most like me. And then Mansoor was extremely different for me. And I decided very early on in the process, I was inspired by in the news, I saw that Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic had signed an agreement with the United Arab Emirates to launch passenger ships from the UAE into kind of low Earth orbit as space tourism. And I was really intrigued by that idea of kind of like a private space entrepreneur working in Abu Dhabi, which I didn't know that much about, and I started looking into it, and I realized that Abu Dhabi has a really robust space program. They have plans to build a city on Mars, which is really cool. So they have a lot of ambitions and a lot of scientific investment. So I decided very early on that I wanted an Emirati character, and that I wanted him to be a point of view character. I wanted him to fall in love with Alex, and so I really built him using a lot of research. So I read a ton of books on Abu Dhabi. I tried to really understand a lot about the culture. And later in the process, I engaged a sensitivity reader as well. And she's an Egyptian, and she is also a scientist, which is kind of an added bonus. And so she really helped me really get the details right and the cultural representation right. So, but at the same time, when I was building Mansoor, I kind of knew if he was going to be kind of someone who was going to go build a hotel on the moon, fall in love with an American woman, he wasn't going to be kind of a very traditional Emirati. He was going to be kind of somebody who was like moving between cultures. And so I built him kind of as somebody who's like really excellent code switcher. So when he is in America, he acts very Western. And then when he is with his father in Abu Dhabi, he's much more traditional and kind of assumes the role of kind of what his father would expect. And that was a real source of tension for him, and kind of that his character journey is about kind of how to make himself whole. But all of that is not my experience, right? And I think I'm a big believer that if you do it right, you can write outside of your own experience and outside of your own culture, but you really have to do it right. You have a responsibility not to screw it up. And I took that so seriously. And I really every piece of Mansour, I was tried to be as incredibly thoughtful and respectful as I could be. And I've gotten some really wonderful feedback on it. People really have noticed the representation in this book, and kind of how well done it is. And so that's really moving to me, because it was really important to me. I come from a big multicultural family. My husband's Black, my children are biracial, and I think it's really important when, as a white person, when I'm writing outside my culture, to like be respectful. And I feel like a lot of my own experiences kind of in my own relationship informs kind of how I approach that, with kind of uh like a no ego, right? Like empathy and learning and curiosity, all those kinds of things. And so I tried to bring kind of all of those traits to my development of Mansour. And yeah, I think I pulled it off, which is really exciting. But it was very important to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one other thing I wanted to touch on was this idea of space, the moon, and possibly beyond being a frontier or a refuge or a necessary step for humanity, because life on Earth becomes less and less tenable. So, as you were, I imagine that idea was probably in the back of your mind. It permeates a lot of science fiction, right? Either overtly, or the undertones are there. So how do you how do you address that? Because I'm sure most people think, okay, well, either this is an exciting thing, right? Or it's an incredibly sobering idea.
Mhm.
How did you deal with it when you were writing? Were there days when you were like, yay, this is very exciting? And probably other days were like, oh, this is so depressing that this is where we are or what we have to be thinking about. So how do you deal with that as a writer? Somebody who's just slogging through that day after day after day, trying to create a story that's still uplifting and fun to read and etc.
Yeah, so I think I would call this a book that is uplifting and fun to read, and but deals with really heavy themes, but with a light touch. And so I think if I think about it, I mean, I'm really alarmed by the climate crisis, and kind of the lack of kind of international will to do something about it. And that kind of permeates through the book. I basically, the solution that my characters have is that it's all about protecting the earth and about kind of reducing the amount of human kind of interaction with the earth, especially around the area of like heavy industry that is causing climate change. And the idea that, look, in 50 years, I mean, a lot of this is irreversible, right? Probably today, a lot of this is irreversible, but you can still make it less bad. And so I think a lot of books about space are all about kind of like just leaving Earth, or Earth is less important. And in this book, really the whole point is about making Earth safe, right? And for the long term, even if it takes place in space. And I think, I really wanted to show, and again, with a really light touch, like what kind of was happening with climate change. So, there's discussion about like, there's like a billion people living below sea level, and that they're basically like anticipating that they're all going to be displaced. I mean, and that's a real statistic, right? Like that's real. And like in this world 50 years from now, like that's going to happen like in the next decade, right? Like it's immediate, like it's an immediate problem. We're already seeing it. There's already cities that are that have been abandoned, right? Because they're underwater, that kind of thing. But at the same time, it's a hopeful book. It's really hopeful. It's not bleak at all, and it's really about kind of like what can we do about this? And kind of one of the central tensions is so that the kind of the antagonists are environmental activists who kind of get increasingly interested in terrorism as their form of activism. And when I was writing them, I was trying to find as much language of real environmental activists, like the ones that are on the more extreme side. What are they saying? How are they saying it? How are they thinking about it? And I think the result is that like those terrorists are super, super sympathetic, right? Super sympathetic because I'm trying to base them on real people and real ideas, right? And in the end, it's about kind of like, what are your methods, right? Is your method, this is just broken and needs to just get blown up? Or can we work within the system? Can we work with the politicians and the wealthy and the scientists and like, bring kind of different groups together toward a common cause? And I mean, to be honest, I wrote this book, a lot of this book in like the Obama administration. I finished it in the Biden administration. Like, it's a little more optimistic than if I were, my second book is a lot more pessimistic about kind of the way these things could go. But this book is like, like I grew up in became an adult in the first Obama years, and I feel like that is informed so much of kind of my worldview, which is that, if we do work together, we can make change. And so that is where this book is coming from very much so. So I never really felt all that depressed writing it. And in many ways, it was me processing depressing news in a way that was cathartic
Hmm.
because it ends on a really optimistic, hopeful note, while not being cheery and like
Right.
unrealistic, but just, like if we work together, maybe we can do something about kind of the crisis bearing down on us.
Right. Now, were you always a sci-fi fan? I mean, did you read, watch science fiction? Are you a fan, or was this an idea that you had, and so this is sort of new territory for you?
Yeah, I love sci-fi. I grew up with Star Trek, especially Deep Space Nine, and I've kind of been a sci-fi reader my whole life. My favorite sci-fi author is Lois McMaster Bujold, who wrote the Vorkosigan Saga, which is beloved by a small group of people, and most people have never heard of it. And she was a female sci-fi writer writing in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s with really interesting, compelling characters and relationships. It's space opera, far-flung future, but it's really grounded in people. And that just she's the kind of writer I want to be, and especially some of her later books. She's got a book that it's like a murder mystery plot on a colonized planet, but like it's really about a marriage falling apart and about a woman kind of regaining her agency after ending kind of a very dark marriage. And like that's what I love about sci-fi is when you put kind of real people, real situations in an interesting, different setting. I feel like that's where the magic happens. So there's quite a lot of sci-fi that just doesn't do it for me. The ones that where the characters are less important, it doesn't appeal to me as much. But I think. I feel like there's kind of like a future for sci-fi, and I'm kind of positioning myself as a sci-fi romance author, but kind of a different kind of sci-fi romance, one that's much more complex and and about big ideas and about kind of characters that you really root for and relationships you root for. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in kind of forging my own path to kind of a new era for sci-fi. That's my idea.
Yeah, no, that's a great goal. I was just going to ask you, like, what goals do you have as a writer? You mentioned you're working on your second book. So do you have a list of things that you want to write? Or do you have like a 5-year plan? What?
Yeah.
What's up for you in the near future?
Yeah, so I'm in my day job I'm in operations, so I'm always thinking long term and kind of, strategic. So yes, my kind of primary goal is to traditionally publish one book a year. I think that's a realistic timeline for kind of raising a family and having a day job as well. So my second book I've actually written already. I have a two-book deal with Diversion Books. So my second book, The Red Woman of Mars, is scheduled to come out in July of 2026. And I am currently drafting a third book that I'm almost done with, that I just love. And so I feel like I've cracked the code on how to do this with my life, and try to I do a lot of late night writing. I write every day. And so yeah, so my goal would be to be a like to write a book a year. I have no ambition to quit my day job. I think it's very difficult to make a living on writing, and it's very volatile. And I have three kids that I need to raise, and I that's expensive. So, but it would be nice if writing kind of contributed more substantially to the kind of the pie of my
Right.
household finances. But yeah, and then I think I only want to publish books I'm really proud of. I don't want to chase market trends too much. I want to write kind of what I want to write. So that I think works for me. But I'm also somebody, I don't have a long list of ideas. I have one idea at a time. And I usually start with theme. I think is going to be my way of going forward. So my second book, I wanted to write something that was a reaction to the Dobbs decision, which took away abortion rights. And my third book, I wanted to write it about kind of marriage and kind of working through kind of a messy, difficult marriage. I decided that after my husband and I got to a really good place in our marriage with some therapy, and it was like, ooh, this is like a really rich topic that I want to explore with sci-fi. I those are two really ones that one of those is really personal, one of those is really political, but like I think I always want to like have something I want to kind of dig in on. And so I anticipate when I finish this book and I'm like, okay, what's next? I'll ask myself like what kind of theme am I excited about and start there. That seems to be a good approach for me.
Yeah, good. Well, it sounds good. A lot of people start with different things, so whatever you find works for you and drives you forward, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're busy with not just the writing, but everything else in that pie that you were talking about. So where can people go if they want to learn more about you and the book, look for new releases, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I love connecting with readers, potential readers. So please come find me, send me a DM, interact with me. So my website is clairebarner.com. My Instagram is clairebarner_author. That's also Threads, same handle. Those are probably my primary places that I interact. So, um, you know, I'm always interested in kind of hearing from people. And then you can find my book kind of it's distributed by Simon and Schuster, so it's everywhere. So you can get it on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, at your local bookstore. So, and I always encourage you to support your local bookstore. So, yes, wherever books are sold. And I really, I'm a debut author. I'm just starting out, so every purchase really makes a difference for me right now. So if this book sounds interesting to you, I would really appreciate your support.
Yeah, every purchase and every review.
Every review, oh yes.
Good. Well, Claire, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I want to wish you luck with Moonrising and book two. We'll look forward to that next summer, and book three when that comes out, hopefully the following year. So, congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much, Stacey. This is great.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.